The Wookiees of Kashyyyk are Star Wars' most well-known alien species. They and their homeworld make regular appearances in Star Wars media, perhaps most notably in Revenge of the Sith. But unlike many of the other regularly occurring planets in Star Wars, it isn't terribly clear what makes Kashyyyk so important. It was a unique planet, to be sure, but what gave it such an outsized role in the Clone Wars and other key chapters of galactic history? The answer is much more complicated than you might think, and in this video, we'll be explaining why.
Attention, Sergeant on deck!
Kashyyyk and its sister world Trandosha were located in the Mid-Rim, in the northern half of the part of the galaxy known as the Slice. It lay at the heart of a clump of sectors that, appropriately, were known as the Kashyyyk region. These were the Mytarantor sector, the Turskia sector, the Lantillian sector, the Taldot sector, the Hala sector, the Castola sector, and the Trax sector. These sectors were crossed by several major hyperspace routes. The Polemian trade route crossed the Lantillian sector at the region's northern edge. The Randon Run and the Trax Tube ran north to south through the region's Corward side, and Corward to Spinward, the region was also crossed by the Lesser Lantillian route, the Great Kashyyyk branch, the Pabol Slayeron, and the Utmian Pabol, the latter of which was traditionally the main route for trade between the Republic and Hutt space. Each of the sectors in the Kashyyyk region was important in some way or another. The Mytarantor sector, the center of the region, contained Kashyyyk and Trandosha, but its capital was Randon, a key human-dominated trading world. Randon lay at the junction of the Utmian Pabol, the Pabol Slayeron, the Trax Tube, and the Randon Run, while Kashyyyk and Trandosha sat at the crossroads of the Randon Run and the Great Kashyyyk branch. This meant that a whole lot of trade and traffic ran through the Mytarantor sector, bringing prosperity to Randon, Kashyyyk, Trandosha, and the sector's many Wookiee and Trandoshan colonies. It also attracted slavers and pirates, who made the grim industrial world Mytarantor a regional base from which they harassed shipping all throughout the Mid-Rim. To the north of the Mytarantor sector, the Lantillian sector was dominated by Lantils, an ancient Polemian route industrial world, while the Taldot sector featured Taros IV, home to the inventors of the Vulture Droid, which sat at the junction of the Lesser Lantillian route and the Great Kashyyyk branch. Bimisari in the Hala sector was home to the Bims, a species of traders with contacts across the rim, while the Castolar sector contained Dirktil, the home of the Sorens, and Ubrikia, a key mech world that produced tanks and other armored vehicles. The Turskia and Trax sectors each contained a slew of mining worlds, and Daysum, the industrialized capital of the Trax sector, controlled the Trax Tube, a route that was the backbone of the mid-rim mining sectors. Apart from its many strategically valuable worlds and key hyperspace junctions, the Kashyyyk region was home to many peoples that had a great deal of political and or economic power over the Mid-Rim. The Wookiees of Kashyyyk had both. They maintained control over most of the trade that passed along the Great Kashyyyk branch, making their homeworld a vital spaceport with thriving shipbuilding and star charting industries. The Klatovak Guild, a secret society of Wookiee navigators, forged hyperspace routes all over the region, and indeed, all over the galaxy, that were only known to themselves, giving the Wookiees a decisive edge in regional shipping. This gave them considerable power within the Senate during the final millennia of the Republic, which Wookiee senators used to share the wisdom of their people, earning Kashyyyk further political influence. The influence of the Wookiees was so strong by the time of the Clone Wars that a big chunk of the Mid-Rim followed Kashyyyk's lead in galactic politics. The Trandoshans were usually overshadowed by their planetary neighbors, but their heavy involvement in the galactic underworld gave them power of a different sort. Trandosha and the Mytarandor were hubs for slavers, bounty hunters, and mercenaries, and they controlled the underworld across much of the Kashyyyk region. The Trandoshans' distant relatives, the Solrin, were also a prominent species, though their power was accrued legitimately. The Sorin homeworld of Dirktil was a wealthy agri-world, and the Sorin controlled a considerable chunk of the trade between the Republic and Hutt space. Bimisari and Randon were also powerful trade worlds, controlling a chunk of mid-rim shipping. The Bims covered more territory, but the Rendoni were ultimately more powerful due to the sheer number of key routes that passed through their homeworld. There were also the Lentilians, whose position on the Polemian routes, long history with the Republic, and industrial development made them a similarly prosperous people. But not all of the powers that had influence in the Kashyyyk region were locals. The region was essentially the hub of the mid-rim, or at least of the portion located in the slice, and it sat at the nexus between several neighboring regions. It lay between the core worlds and the ancient settlements of the Outer Polemian, between the Republic and the Hutts, and between the Polemian and the low-profile worlds of the deep mid-rim. Its long-standing status as the boundary between the Republic and the Hutts was especially important. By the Republic's final millennium, the Hutts had de facto direct control over the Hala and Kastula sectors, and their influence stretched as far forward as Randon. The Hutts, however, were kept in check by the Bothans and Lanniks, two powerful mid-rim civilizations from the southern end of the slice. The Trax Tube and its tributaries linked Lannik and Bothawai to the Kashyyyk region, and for thousands of years, the fiercely independent Bothans and the staunchly Republic-aligned Lanniks kept the influence of Nal Hutta in check, balancing the Kashyyyk region between the two galactic superpowers. All the nuances of the Kashyyyk region came into play with the outbreak of the Clone Wars, which saw the region split between systems loyal to the Republic and those loyal to the CIS. The Trax, Kastula, and Hala sectors all sided with the Confederacy, despite the Sorin and Bims initially aligning with the Republic during the Separatist Crisis. The Lentilian sector remained loyal, with Lancils becoming a Republic fortress world, the primary mustering point for Republic forces in the Felucia Theatre. Between them, the Taldots, Mytarantor, and Turskiar sectors were split. Turskiar was a battleground for most of the war, while large chunks of the other two sectors joined the Confederacy, most notably Randon, the Mytarantor sector capital. However, other portions of these sectors remained loyal to the Republic, most notably Kashyyyk, which was initially neutral but joined the war on the Republic's behalf in 20 BBY. Kashyyyk in particular was in a bit of a tricky situation. Its choice of side mattered greatly, as entire sectors of the Mid-Rim would follow its lead if it seceded from or declared support from the Republic. Either way, however, Kashyyyk was in for a rough time. Its sphere of influence was split, and it lay between Lantils and Randon, each of which were crucial stronghold worlds for their respective sides. During the first half of the war, Kashyyyk tried to avoid the inevitable by remaining neutral, though its leaders privately preferred the Republic. However, the Confederacy was determined to force Kashyyyk to make a choice, hoping that they'd choose to secede with enough pressure, since much of their sphere of influence had already seceded. However, Separatist leadership misstepped considerably. In trying to exert pressure on Wookiee leadership, they ultimately pushed the defiant Wookiees into declaring war on the Confederacy. In response, the Confederacy allied with the Trandoshans and got them to harass Kashyyyk for much of the Clone Wars, and during the Outer Rim sieges, General Grievous even made a bid to conquer Kashyyyk outright. The end of the Clone Wars saw the Kashyyyk region brought under Imperial control, which led to several changes in the balance of power. The Hutts were driven out entirely, while the influence of the Lanniks and Bothans was considerably reduced. The non-human Bims and Sorin were forced out of local trade by the Empire, which instead threw its weight behind Randon and Lentils, which were human-dominated. Kashyyyk itself was enslaved, and the Trandoshans grew wealthy and powerful through their collaboration with the Empire in the Wookiee slave trade. These changes ultimately came back to bite the Empire in the ass, however, as the worlds of the Kashyyyk region ended up being a major source of support for the Rebel Alliance, which drove the Empire out not long after the Battle of Endor. But that's enough Star Wars geopolitics for one video. Though, if you'd like to see videos about the nuances of other regions, let us know. But what do you think? Which of the various powers in the Kashyyyk region do you like the most? Free to post your thoughts in the comments section below. And as always guys, thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.